How many of you struggle with idealism? How many of you got irritated when the wrong words were up here? Okay. Come on. And then, you didn't get irritated. You didn't say that guy should be fired or anything like that, I hope. But you did say, sheesh. And reinforcing that over and over again. And I appreciate that, Nancy. But the truth of the matter is, I think we all suffer with a little bit of idealism, don't we? Am I alone? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. When you go to a fast food restaurant and it's not fast, when you go to the post office and the line is out the door, okay, when you go to the DMV and they don't have a clue what you need, okay, we all suffer with a little bit of idealism, don't we? How many of you would recommend marriage? Guys, raise your hand fast. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. That was your chance. I should have warned you ahead of time, I know. But how many of you would recommend having children? Parents, raise your hands fast if your kids are here. Yeah, I would recommend that, wouldn't you? But would you say that is the salvation of everything? Oh man, how many marriages have you seen that are probably not, the best? Don't consider your own first. But how many of you have seen that? How many of you would say, a young couple just married and they're thinking about having children and they say, oh, it's going to be the most wonderful thing in the world. Do you want to warn them a little bit? You want to say, well, temper that a little bit. It is the most wonderful thing. It can be, and many times is, but sometimes it comes with a little dose of the negative too, doesn't it? I read a story this last week about a lady who was having lunch with one of her friends, and her friend was saying, oh yeah, my husband and I, we're going to have a baby. We're getting ready to, and da-da-da, and she's so excited. And she talked up in this article about all the things that were going through her head. The things that she did not say. What she said was, oh, that's wonderful. But what she said was, oh, I hope you're ready for the heartache. I hope you're ready for the disappointments. I hope you're ready for the discipline that needs to happen. I hope you're ready for all of this other stuff other than the things you receive. I hope you're ready to pay the price for what it takes to be a parent. And sometimes we think that being a parent is the best job in the world, and sometimes we think it's the worst job in the world. So we're going to talk today about serving in the church. It can be the best job in the world, and it can be the worst job in the world. I remember talking to a lady one time, and she was in ministry. She was in full-time ministry. And I said, I think your son would make a great youth pastor. And she said, I hope not. Ministry is the worst job in the world. And she was having a particularly bad week. I understand that. But, sometimes we think that serving Christ is not all that it's cracked up to be. Sometimes it's a little tough, isn't it? Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's disappointing. Sometimes it's just downright hard work. And I want you to know today that we kind of divide into two classes, people that serve God, right? There's clergy, right? People that get paid to do it, and they should do it, right? And they should do it well, right? Yeah. And then there are lay people, that don't have to do it so well. Yeah, not me. Thank you, Nancy. Because we're all called to the same standard, aren't we? Okay, how many ministers are there in here today? Okay, I'm one. Okay, you're all ministers. I want you to know everybody's a minister. Everybody, if you're a child of God, you're a minister. And there should be no differentiation between people who lead and people who follow in ministry. There should be no differentiation there. And if you do a little church history, you'll find that it didn't happen until about the 3rd century. Okay, the 3rd century, when there was a big change in church hierarchy, and we started having people that got paid to do what I do. And there was a differentiation in class now in service in the church, and people that got paid were expected, to do things. Now, when you see a Christian leader fail, isn't that especially painful to you? When you see a regular church Christ follower fail, is that equally disappointing to you? Yeah, it should be. But sometimes the higher the profile, the higher the disappointment. And so today we're going to take a look at what Paul has to say about giving us some insights about what serving Christ is all about. One of the things I love about our church, and we're kind of small here today, but one of the things I like about our church most is that virtually everybody that comes to this church serves. When we do an outreach, we get people that come and help and do all kinds of stuff. And people in our church serve. And so I love that. And so this is not a reprimand. I don't want you to think that at all. But it is an encouragement to you to continue on faithfully serving the God that we all love. In 1 Timothy 1, 18 through 20, Paul says this to Timothy. Now remember, Paul's writing this letter to Timothy, who is a young man in the faith. And he's a young man in ministry. And he's preparing him to take the position at the church in Ephesus. Now Ephesus was fraught with a few things that were wrong with it. One is that there were some false teachers there, and we've talked about that a couple of weeks ago. One is that the people didn't have really a clue of who to follow and what to do. And so Paul sends Timothy to this church to first of all confront the false teachers. Then he says, I want you to instruct them on what church is really all about, what service to Christ is all about. And he tells us here in just what he says to Timothy some very insightful things about that. So Timothy's getting prepared to become this great leader at the church of Ephesus. And this is what Paul tells him. He says, this charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Now remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about false teachers, I said, Paul's going to call out some people that were false teachers by name. And we often think that to do that is just not very Christian. Well, I want you to know that the guy that wrote most of the New Testament called people out by name and said, beware of these guys, because they can make a shipwreck of your faith. And he says there's something more important than acting Christian, and it is being Christian. And so therefore, being should precede the doing. And if the being does precede the doing, you can follow those guys all over the place, because they are what they profess to be. But there are some people out there that are not what they profess to be. And so be careful of those guys. Now, there's a myth out there, and I'm glad that myth has been abolished here in our church. And that is that church is or Christianity is kind of a spectator sport. Have you ever gone to a spectator sport? Have you ever gone to a baseball game, a football game? I love football games, and several people here in our church that used to be in our church are loving football right now, I think. But I don't know. I just throw that out there just because it's just standard fare for pastors to do. But the truth of the matter is, when you go to a football game, you see there's 11 guys on the field on each side. 22 guys out on the field that are physically fit guys. I mean, they are trim, they are fit, they are well prepared to play the game. And there's maybe 70, 80,000 people in the stands that are ill fit, to play the game. And we kind of vicariously do that, though. And we're watching a game. Have you ever watched a game with somebody and they start talking about their high school sporting career? If I hadn't had this knee injury, when I was in high school, I'd probably be playing for the Dodgers. And, that's what happened to me. But the thing is, we start thinking of ourselves in terms of these physically fit guys that are out there on the field doing the thing. And sometimes that carries over to the church. It becomes kind of a spectator sport. If I didn't have this inability, or if I could speak, or if I could do whatever. And I remember thinking that myself when I was a teenager. I used to think, if I could speak, I'd probably be like Billy Graham. Except for the fact that I can't speak, other than that, and I'm not old, and I don't know anything, and by the way, I wasn't called to do that. And there's just kind of a plethora of things that we pile on to say, I'm content with being a spectator and watching somebody else do the job. But the truth of the matter is that every one of us has been called to ministry. Everyone is called to be of service to God that we love, the God that saved us, and to at least share with somebody what happened to us. At the very minimum. And so today, we need to understand some things. We need to understand that if we're going to serve Jesus, number one, you're part of a family. Okay, you're part of a family. Let me make sure. Okay, good. You're part of a family. You're not called to serve Jesus alone. Did you know that? And a lot of us get scared if we have to do something by ourselves. How many of you are good lone rangers? You like to do stuff by yourself. I tell you what, I can't even watch TV by myself. If I'm alone, I'm just half a person. I have to have somebody around. How many of you go to the movies by yourselves? Okay, well, that's more than I can do it. I just think going to the movies by myself, I can't do anything by myself. Number one, I'm just poor at everything, but I need help. But even watching a movie. Sometimes we have to understand that we're not called to be Lone Ranger Christians. Okay, don't go alone. Don't go alone. In fact, sometimes you might have to stand alone. And don't mishear me here. But recognize that you're part of a bigger thing. You're part of a family. And Paul says it this way in verse 18, the very first part. He says, "This charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child." I want you to know, Timothy, I'm sending you out there to Ephesus, and I want you to do this job. I want you to confront the false teachers. I want you to encourage them in what the church is really supposed to be. But I want you to know that you're my son in the faith, and you're not alone. You're not alone. I'm only a camel ride away. Now we're a little closer connected than they were in those days. And how far away are we? A cell phone call away. We're connected. We're a Facebook page away. Now we were talking about Facebook here a little earlier, and you may have different feelings about Facebook than I do. But it can be a great thing, and it can be a connecting thing. But sometimes it can be a distancing thing as well, and we can become somebody that we are not. Okay, Timothy, my child, he says that we're part of this family. Now, how many of you have come from a less than perfect family? Everybody raise your hand. Yeah. We've all come from less than perfect families, haven't we? And so it kind of affects the way that we might even view the church. I often talk about God as my father. And when I say God my father, to me it means something different than it might mean to you. Because my dad was terrific. He was a terrific man. And he sacrificed tremendously for me and my family. He built into me the values that I hold dear even to today. He did things that were not always convenient for him, that cost him, so that I could benefit from those things. My dad was a terrific guy, but there are other people that when I say your dad, you say, oh, he wasn't all that great. He was absent maybe. Maybe he wasn't all that good. Maybe even though he was present, he was absent. Maybe even though he was present, he wasn't absent, and it was a painful thing. And so when I say God, my father, it might say something different to you. But I want you to know that you're part of a family, and you're part of a family that has as its dad the perfect man. The perfect man. The man that will never lead you astray. The man that will never cause you to be messed over. The man that will never leave you, never forsake you. So therefore we have this perfect dad. And even though we may have come from a less than perfect family, we are now part of a family that the brothers and sisters might mess up and run amok. Let's be honest with that. But dad is the secure one. He is the stable one. Now, Timothy, he came from a less than perfect family too. If you know much about Timothy's history, he came from a kind of a mom that was a follower, a believer, and a dad that was a pagan. He was an absolute pagan. And there's some indication that maybe they didn't last very long, mom and dad, and that he came from a single mom family in which his grandmother was a believer, and so he comes from a heritage of faith, but yet it was kind of a messed up home a little bit. And so when Paul says, Timothy, my child, he's kind of being the surrogate dad for him. And he says, even though you came from a bad experience, you have a good dad in God, and you have a good dad in me too. I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to lead you. I'm going to serve you so that you can serve others. Now, we can't really properly serve until we realize that we're part of a family. So let's take a look at what a healthy family is made up of and recognize that these are the conditions that make a healthy church as well. Now, a healthy family recognizes authority and obedience. Now, that's something that doesn't come very often in our lifetime. The talk about authority, the talk about obedience. If you talk to many parents today, I always say that parenting has achieved a new art, and it's the art of suggestion. Parenting is mastering that art of suggestion. And we have families and parents who believe that if I can just somehow package this right for my child, they'll buy it. Now, I want you to know that most children, when they're in those formative stages of life, they are not reasonable people. Okay, and they're not reasonable. And the more we try to reason with them, the more frustrated we become. Because they're not yet reasonable people. They don't have reasoning power. They haven't paid the consequences often enough, many times, to understand, if I do this is going to happen. Because we buffer them from the consequences so very often. And so when it comes to the church and when it comes to time to discuss things like authority and obedience, it's kind of a foreign concept to many young believers. And so therefore I want you to know that a healthy family recognizes authority and obedience. It says in verse 18, Paul's telling Timothy again, this charge I entrust to you, this command I give you, this command, this instruction is what he's saying. This charge I entrust to you. I'm giving you a command. It's really kind of a military term. And it's a military term that says, I have this thing that's absolutely vital and important for you, and I'm going to entrust it to you. I'm going to command you. I'm going to instruct you on how to do it. Now, Paul's saying I have some authority here. I have some ability to tell you what these things are, and I want you to follow them. And it's kind of in the frame of this urgent command that's handed down by a superior officer. How many of you have ever been in the military? Okay, you recognize that when a superior officer gives you a command, what are you to do? Well, you kind of reason with them first and say, sir, that's really not that's not the way I'm built. You need to understand me here. You need to understand what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are. You need to know, and we do stuff like that. You know how we say it in the church? We get a command, we say, somebody says, hey, here's what we need to do as a church. And we say, that's not my gift. Oh, it got quiet in here, didn't it? Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there. But that's kind of what we do. That's not my gift. I want you to know, my gift is not sweeping floors. I'm terrible at it. I don't do a very good job at it. But I want you to know every Sunday, I sweep this floor. And it's not my gift. And if you looked at the job afterwards, you say, that's not his gift. That poor boy needs some help. But the truth of the matter is that sometimes we just have to do stuff because it needs to be done. And we've been commanded by the authorities of this building, you better sweep the floor. You don't get to meet here anymore. So we have to do that. Now, Paul uses some words here in this passage, and he uses the word child. He does not use the word son, okay? And he's using something here. He's indicating the authority structure of the church. It's parental, not organizational. Have you ever thought of that? The authority structure of a church is parental, not organizational. A lot of times, we've got that kind of mixed up, I think, sometimes from the churches that we've experienced in the past. And we say it's an organizational structure, and the guy at the top of the pyramid, we call him the CEO or the senior pastor or whatever we call him. He's the guy with the authority because he's at the top of the organizational structure. Well, it's not an organizational structure. The church is a familial organization. And so who has the authority in a family? Mom.
When Dad's not around.
Or, if Dad's not around. Or Dad. And I'm not going to get into the gender thing here today too much, unless it suits me. But the truth of the matter is that we have a familial organizational structure. And so when when you're in an institutional organizational government, and you do this because I'm the top dog. When you're in a family, you do this because I love you. And it's good for you. And I'm doing it to protect you. Remember the story I told a couple of weeks ago about my daughter yelling at my granddaughter? Remember that? We're crossing the street at Big Spoon, one of my granddaughter's favorite places. It's a yogurt place. I prefer Baskin Robbins, but she goes for yogurt because her mom's warped her out. But she goes out of the store, and we're bebopping across, and she's not running ahead of us, but she's a little bit ahead. And Jenny yells at her all of a sudden, "Stop! Zoe, stop!" And hey, who are you talking to my granddaughter that way? Who do you think you are? And there was a car that whizzed by, and I go, whew, good job, Mom. Now, was she mad at her? Okay, was she just doing that because she's bigger than Zoe is? And no, it's because she loves her. And that sometimes we have to understand in the familial structure, sometimes somebody will say to us, a leader will say to us, stop. And it's because we're doing something that's going to be harmful to us, harmful to the cause of Christ, harmful to the God that we love, harmful to his reputation. Stop. Don't do that. But what's our response? You're not the boss of me. Have you ever said that? Yeah, we have this authority thing that we kind of automatically rebel against. Remember when you're 14, 15, 16 years old? I remember when I was about 12, my sister started bossing me around. And my response to her was, you're not the boss of me. You're not my mom. And she would go tell my mom what I said. And my mom said, she's as good as. when I tell her to tell you something, you better listen up, dude. I said, okay, I'll do that. But we have a hard time with this thing called authority and obedience. In Hebrews 13:17, it says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. So in our church, we have some leaders that say, I want to watch out for you. I want to protect you. Leaders of small groups, leaders of ministries, leaders of the church, whatever it is. I love you and I want to watch out for you. Now, I want you to know something right here, right now, before we go any further. I love you guys. I love you dearly. I pray for you daily, and I want you to benefit from your relationship with Christ and your involvement in our church. I want you to be all that God's called you to be, and that's what I will work toward helping you become. So never, ever, ever think if somebody comes to give you a warning about something that they're doing it just to throw their weight around. If it's not done because we love you, then it should not be done. Okay? Leaders of the church love you. Okay, now, what else does a healthy family do? It must reproduce itself. It must reproduce itself. 2 Timothy 2:2 says this, and the things you have heard me say, and this is again Paul in another letter to Timothy. He says, the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. This stuff that we have called faith is designed to pass on. Okay, we pass it on from one generation to the next. And somewhere on your program there it says Marina Church, the church for the next generation, or passing faith on to the next generation. That's what we're about. Because if we don't do that, what happens? We'll cease to exist. You know, what will cause the extinction of humankind? Don't have any more babies. Nobody has any more babies, and we will be dead in a generation. You know, do you understand that? You know, I've often thought about that. I've thought about that from time to time. What would happen if we just quit having babies? You know, what a weird way for the world to end, huh? You know, people would just become extinct. We'd die. Same is true of our Christian faith. We're always, always, always one generation away from extinction. So if we don't do our job to pass on to other people our faith, then we are contributing toward the extinction of the Christian faith. So we're designed to reproduce ourselves. Now, ministry, I want you to know, ministry is always done in the context of human relationships. Every ministry that we perform is done through a point of contact through a human relationship. Okay? So what is the first step that you would need to take in order to reproduce yourself? Initiate some kind of relationship with somebody. When I stop and think about, there used to be a big movement about church growth, and here's the things you need to do. In fact, there used to be seminars all over the place. Go to this seminar, and they'll teach you how to grow a church and do this, and grow it this way, and do that, and do this. And it was always organizationally minded. It was never personally relationship minded. Always organizationally. Okay, and so they did these organizations to get people to come to this and do this. And I say to you, here's how you grow a church. You go out and you invite someone to come. You tell them about what Christ has done to you. Tell them what your life was like before you met him. Okay, my life was characterized by fear. You all know that. I was scared to death of everything. I was scared to death that the Soviet Union was going to bomb my house with an atomic bomb because I was so important that they would target my house. And as an 8-year-old guy, I would remember those planes flying over my house, and I would think, honest, this is not a joke. This is not an exaggeration. I would lay there and I would think, I wonder if that's the plane. I wonder if that's the one. And I was scared to death all the time. I was scared to death to speak in front of people. I was scared to death of everything. I was scared to death that people wouldn't know who I was. I was scared to death all the time. And I remember one time I was sitting in church, and my Sunday school teacher had told me all of my life that I was a sinner, because it was obvious. But I remember one time sitting in church, the pastor guy that was speaking is a guy from Oregon, and he says, we're all born in sin. And for the very first time I remember, that's me. I was born in sin. I am a sinner. Not only do I do just bad stuff, but I'm a sinner. And that excludes me from God's kingdom. Oh no. And I remember that realization. I said, there's something I must do about that. And he told me what to do. He says, hey, confess your sin, repent of it, follow Christ. I said, I can do that. And so I did it. And I remember going home that night. My grandfather came in my room, and he says, "Hey, that was a real commitment you made there tonight." I said, "Yeah, it was." He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "One thing I don't feel is scared." And that's what changed my life. That's what changed. So when you initiate a relationship with somebody, how long did it take me to tell you that? It seemed like hours, but it was really probably about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So therefore, just share with them what happened to you, what you were like before, what happened to change you, and what it was like afterwards. That's a simple thing to do. So therefore, initiate a relationship. How many of you like to bowl? Oh, well. I like to bowl. I didn't know I liked to bowl. And one day, Cindy, we're in another church, and I've always been a big believer that you need to get involved in something that has some touch with people that are not church people. Heaven forbid that, huh? Gee, you be scared because they might corrupt you. And be careful, they might. But we said, okay, let's get involved in a bowling league. And let's just, kind of do what we're going to do. So we got involved in a bowling league. We started bowling. And Cindy was a superior bowler. And it was very shameful for me. And I knew this ahead of time. I remember when we were first dating, she said, "Hey, let's go bowling." And how did I know that she was a bowler? And so she bowled like a 220 something, whatever, And I said, "Well, we'll do something else next time." But it was just like that. So we get involved in this bowling league, and she's just good at it. She knows what she's doing, and I'm out there just bowling. And we got involved with people, and they found out what I did. I was a pastor, and pretty soon I had this one girl. She came up to me, and she's carrying her bowling ball. And she comes up to me, and she goes, everybody called me Pastor Mike. And she says, "Pastor Mike, would you lay your hands on this ball?" I said, "What?" She says, "It doesn't know its way to the head pin at all." And what did I do? I laid my hand on her ball, and I prayed that she would know how to guide the ball. I did. I just prayed. And I remember one time at the end of the season, we're having this banquet, where you get all the awards for, all those other people got awards for what they did. And I watched. And this guy comes up to me before. He says, "Oh, Pastor Mike, I just found out that one of my friend's sons was being towed on his skateboard behind a car. And he fell and he smacked his head. He's unconscious. They don't know if he's going to live. Would you lead us in a prayer for that?" I said, "A bowling league praying all together?" And I got scared. Literally, I did. I said, "Hey, you got to clear that with the president of the league. I can't just get up there and say, 'Hey, you guys, we're going to pray.'" So he did. And the president came over and says, "Hey, yeah, we want you to do that." I said, "Cool." And so I got up and I led him in prayer for this kid. And he got well. God did some terrific things. One of the school teachers came up to me and she says, "Oh, Pastor Mike, I've got this girl in my class and she's been diagnosed with cancer. She can't come to school anymore. I don't know what to do. I want you to pray for her." I said, "Here, let's pray for her right now. And I'll continue to pray for her. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to her house and ask her mom how you can help tutor her." She goes, "Oh, that's an awesome idea." And she did. And she started this whole thing. And she got him on Skype. And she was in the classroom and all the whole thing. And she did a terrific job. But man, God can use you in a personal relationship just like he uses everybody else. And so therefore, if you don't have those personal relationships and you don't have your antenna up recognizing opportunities, you'll miss them altogether. You need to reproduce yourself. And that's the way you do it, through personal relationships and help that God can offer. Now, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? You're afraid. And what are you afraid of? Rejection. You're afraid that if I offer some help, they say, what are you, one of those Christians? What would your response be if they said that? "Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. And I have some help for you, and I offer it to you. If you take it, great. If you don't, that's up to you. But I have help for you." And you'll find more often than not, people will take the help. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of rejection. And that's one of the reasons why we fail to reproduce ourselves. Okay, number 3, a good family member recognizes giftedness. A good parent recognizes giftedness. You know that? You see something in your kids, and you see that they're a good student. You see that they're good at soccer. You see they're good at baseball. What do? You foster that. You foster that. You encourage that. You help them get special instruction. You do whatever you do as a parent to do that. And that's what being part of a family is all about. In verse 18, it says, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you. Now, Timothy had someone in his life that recognized some great things in him and made some prophetic utterances and said some prophetic things about him. They said something like this: Timothy, someday you're going to be a superior follower of Christ and you're going to be a leader of a great church. That's what they said. And so Paul says, in accordance with what had previously been said about you, I'm going to empower you now to do that. You know, the same thing happens in a church. You know, you see people leading. You know, you see me maybe up here every Sunday, and you say, well, he's just a different kind of guy. He's just the kind of guy that does that. I'm not the kind of guy that does this. Okay, I've told you many times about my senior year in high school where I was required to do a speech in front of the class for 15 minutes. I could not do it. In fact, I ditched class every day for the last 2 weeks of that semester, which was the last semester of the year. I took an F in English for that semester, never had an F, never had a D, never had hardly a C in my life. And I took an F simply because I said, I will not stand up in front of somebody and speak. Okay, I'm not this kind of guy. Okay, so somebody saw some giftedness in me, and his name was John Jackson. He said, Mike, I see something in you that God can use. I said, oh dear, what? And he says, I think you would be a good youth pastor. I said, yeah, no, I don't think so. And he says, oh, I'm not asking you to do it. I just ask you to pray about it. Be careful when somebody says that to you. Okay, I'm not going to say don't pray about it, but I'm going to say, be careful. And so I started praying about that. And I remember God saying, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, you can do it. Cindy says, yeah, you can do it. Cindy, I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for Cindy, I would never be in the ministry. You know, God, one thing, but Cindy, another thing. And she has a little different approach. But she believed in me. And she said, you can do it, you can do it. So I started bargaining with God. I said, okay, God, I'll tell you what, I'll do it if I don't have to speak in front of crowds. I'll speak in front of kids, but people. Adults, that's a whole different thing. I won't do that. And God was silent. And I said another thing. And I don't know, for me, growing up in the church, everybody that was anybody in ministry came from Texas. It was just kind of a weird thing. And everybody came from Texas. So I really didn't like Texas. I had been through it a few times on the way to Missouri, and I didn't see anything worth stopping for. And so I told God, I said, okay, I don't want to speak to adults, and number two, don't make me go to Texas. Why would God make me go to Texas? I mean, the Texans would look at me and say, who's this guy? But in my mind, that was the big stop signs. And so, of course, God, do you find that God bargains with you? Nah, he doesn't bargain with you. And so when I tell him my bargaining points, he just becomes silent. He says, I said, okay, God, you heard me. You got me. Okay. And so he kept talking, and I kept praying and kept praying the same prayer. No Texas, no adults, no Texas, no adults, no Texas, no adults. God was extremely quiet, and it seems like things just were stagnant for me. And finally I said, okay, God, I get it. I'll go to Texas. But don't make me speak to adults. And a silence again. Okay, I'll speak to adults if I have to. On rare occasion, I'll do it if I have to. And so, and then the doors opened. I went into ministry, did it full time, and had the best time of my life, speaking to adults and not going to Texas. But the thing is that sometimes we have to get to that point where we recognize it's not my natural innate abilities, but it's the giftedness that God gives me that empowers me to do whatever I do. And so if God's done anything through me in your life, it's not because I'm good at anything. It's because God has gifted me and God has blessed your ears maybe to hear things I did not say. We have people in our church that have grown from just leaps and bounds. Like Bill and Francis. I tell you, you guys are a blessing to me. I've known the Dessels since their kids were just little kids in my living room doing their homework. And to see them develop and become leaders in the church, I just go, wow, awesome. Bonnie, she leads our outreach ministry. And just to see where she has come from in the last year and a half to where she is now, I just go, wow. and to see all of you participating in ministry when we do our outreach and when we do stuff. When I see Rob, for example, barbecuing, I just go, that's what he was made for. You know? Seriously. Now, I want you to know that I've known Rob for a long time, and he's come a long way, and as we all have. But he has a heart that wants to see people's lives changed. He doesn't mind spending his money to see that happen. And it's a blessing to me to see people sacrifice their time, their efforts, their energy, their resources to see this church be able to do what it does. And so we recognize people's giftedness. Now, there's a couple of things I need to warn you about here. Number one is don't obsess over spiritual giftedness. You know, like I said earlier, some people say, oh, well, that's not my gift. Oh, could you help us pass out flyers? Oh, that's not my gift. Oh, could you help us greet people at the door? That's not my gift. Could you help us with our children's ministry? That's not my gift. I want you to know, don't obsess over that. Don't use your lack of spiritual giftedness to prevent yourself from doing routine jobs. And that's the second thing. Don't neglect routine jobs. Don't wait until you find what your spiritual gift is to get involved in ministry. Sometimes that's how you find it. You get involved in a ministry and you say, hey, this was made for me. This is exactly what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I have to offer it, but I'm going to do everything that I can do. And God just naturally empowers you to be able to do stuff and be fulfilled by it. Be fruitful in it. And so therefore you recognize what you're gifted at by doing stuff sometimes. We think that, I have to take a spiritual gifts assessment test and figure out what I am and who I am. Do I like group? Do I like people interactions? Or do I like task things? Or whatever it is, and all this stuff. And we get so bogged down with that we never do anything. So start doing stuff and find out what fits. We have ample opportunities for you to become involved, okay?
If it doesn't fit, you can try something else.
If I let you. You certainly can. You certainly can. And in our church, let me say this. In our church, you come to me and say, you know what, I think we should do this. You know what I'm going to say? Fire up and do it. Fire up and do it. Don't come to me and say, Pastor Mike, you should do this. Don't say that. Because I'm going to say, I'm doing just about, I'm doing more than I'm good at now. But if God's called you to do that, I want to empower you to do that. Okay? Now, number two, you're part of an army. Not only are you part of a family, but Paul uses some army talk here too. He says that by them you may wage the good warfare. Okay, holding faith and a good conscience. Now, a good soldier does what? A good soldier perseveres. And when he uses this term warfare, what he's talking about is a military campaign. Not just a battle, but a military campaign. Now, there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. There's going to be victories, there's going to be defeats. He says, but in the long run, you will come out the winner, but you have to be in it for the long haul. You must learn to persevere. Now, most of us can do some things for a short period of time, right? In fact, we can almost all do anything for a short period of time. Have you ever done something like that? You say, okay, I'll do this. And for a short period of time, you're productive, you're useful, you're fulfilled. But after a while, it just kind of runs out of gas. Have you ever been there? Yeah. But what Paul's talking about here is the longer, tougher fight of warfare, of a campaign that goes from here to here. The victory is out here. Don't lose gas right here is what he's saying. We often start out real strong and then we get tired, don't we? We get tired. Have you ever gotten up in the morning, the first times you come to church, you go, oh man, church was awesome. I can't wait till next week. Next week you go, oh, church was awesome. I can't wait till next week. And about 8, 10, 12 weeks down the road, you go, I'm feeling like a good sleep would do me good. We get there, we get tired, don't we? And then pretty soon after we get tired the second time. You know what it's called the second time you get tired? You're retired. You're tired again. And pretty soon, retired, what does that connotate to you? I don't have to do that anymore. And we retire. You know where retired Christians are? They're in heaven. Okay? That's where you go when you retire. Okay, because as long as you're on this earth, God says there's some value that you bring to this thing called the church. There's value that I've instilled within you that I want you to use in your ministry in the world. And so therefore, as long as you're here, persevere and keep up the good fight. Now, a good soldier also serves with honor. Okay, a good soldier, serves with honor. A good soldier serves with honor. In verse 19 it says, holding faith and a good conscience. Conscience, I'm sorry. Now, you know what conscious disobedience is? It's a spiritual killer. When you know something, James says, in James 4:17, he says, to know what is right and not do it, if you know what is right and you don't do it, it is sin. So conscious disobedience is a spiritual killer. Okay, it'll kill your spirit. It'll cause you to disobey, and disobedience causes what? Estrangement from the one whom I should obey. I remember when I was a kid, if I disobeyed my mom, what did I do? I avoided her like the plague because she knew everything. And she knew if I disobeyed. And I knew that if all she had to do was look at me and she'd go, oh, you disobeyed something. I don't know what it is, but you disobeyed something. I remember. And so what did I do? I avoided her. When we have that relationship with God, sometimes when we're in disobedience to Him, what do? We don't pray. We don't go to church. We don't read our Bible. We avoid Him. And so therefore, this conscious disobedience is a real spiritual killer. Let's go to number 3. Number 3, not only are you part of a family, not only are you part of an army, but you're part of a ship's crew. For all you sailors out there, this is a welcome note for you. He says in verses 19 and 20, he says, by rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith. Okay, by neglecting being part of a family, by part of an army, by being part of good sound teaching, by being part of the church, he says, you've made a shipwreck of your faith. And he says, guess what? There's a couple of guys out there, Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I've handed over to Satan that they may learn not to blaspheme. Apparently they'd been blasphemers. And he says, oh man, the cure for blasphemy is what? Oh, let's go love them. Let's love them, and maybe they'll understand and correct their ways. No, he didn't say that, did he? He said, I'm going to hand them over to Satan. I'm going to let Satan do what he does. Okay, and what does Satan do? He lets them run amok. And pretty soon when you run amok, you recognize, I'm running amok. This is no good place to be. I need to repent and come back. And so he says, I'm willing to let that happen. Now, what is the church shipwrecked upon most often? And I'm going to give you 3 things here. Number 1, unbelief. When we hear something and we don't believe it, or when we know something and don't practice it, that's what unbelief is. And it will cause us to shipwreck our faith. When we try to make the church something that fits us, rather than us fitting it, it'll cause a shipwreck. Okay, there's another thing that will cause a shipwreck, and that is worldliness. Okay, when we try to be more like the world than we are like Christ, okay, or when we try to be like the world at all, okay, that will cause a shipwreck to our faith. And the last thing is persecution. Sometimes persecution will purify the church, but only when we persevere under persecution. When we get persecuted and we say, oh, wow, this is too painful, I'm going to leave, I'm going to bail out, I'm going to do whatever, then the world has its way and we become shipwrecked in our faith. Now, there's some things that sailors do, and there's a couple of things, and let's talk about them real quickly. Number 1, sailors sail through stormy seas. Okay, when it gets tough, when the waves get up, you find the best sailors at their best, because that's what they know how to do. They know how to sail through stormy seas. Now, to whom do you look when storms come in your life? Okay, I hope we look to Jesus. But sometimes what we do is we look at ourselves. The storms come into our lives and we look at ourselves and we say things like, I don't have the ability to overcome this. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time. I don't have the. We look at ourselves. Sometimes we look at other people. Okay, we compare ourselves and say, oh man, I saw what happened to this guy when the storm came in his life and he just bailed out on the church. I think I'll do the same. Okay, now, sometimes we can say, I tried Christianity, I tried faith, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work. Have you ever heard people say that? I hear people say that. I talk to them, they say, oh yeah, I used to go to church all the time. It just didn't work for me. I said, well, what happened? And they'll always describe some bad thing that happened. And I said, what did you do when that happened? Well, I looked at the people who did it to me, and I said, I don't want any part of this anymore. I said, that's where you made your mistake, because you looked at other people rather than looking at Christ. I said, when you're in a forest and somebody is hunting you down with a high-powered rifle, do you stand behind a little twig of a tree, or are you going to stand behind the biggest oak you can find? Well, I took the biggest oak. I said, okay, when storms come in your life, don't compare yourself to the little twigs that are around you, but look to the one who's the oak behind whom you can hide. make sure you look to the right solution. Okay, sailors do another thing. They make tough decisions. Okay, now Paul uses a little illustration here. Am I on the? Oh gosh, you guys want to be done first. Okay, he uses a little thing here in verse 20. He says, among whom, he says there's some bad things that happen to people, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I've handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Okay, have you ever heard of someone who had a life-debilitating experience and they cut off a limb in order to live? Did you ever hear about that guy that was rock climbing all out by himself and he fell and he got his arm caught and he's hanging and he can't get it out? What did he do? Cut off his arm. Cut off his arm to what? Save his life. And Paul says here, there are sometimes some things we have to make tough decisions to cut off a limb in order to save a life. There are some things happening in this church, he says, Hymenaeus and Alexander, for example, that we need to cut off in order to purify the church so that it does not continue to become polluted. So what was Paul willing to do for the church? He's willing to cut off a limb in order to save it. That's what churches do. Now, serving Jesus is tough, isn't it? Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's discouraging. Sometimes it's frustrating. But sometimes it's the most wonderful thing in the world. The best job in the world sometimes is at the same time the worst job in the world. Now, families are messy, right? Ever been part of a messy family? Ever been part of a messy church family? Yeah, I have. And sometimes they're just messy. But that's what we bring to it. We bring a mess, don't we? When you go home today, look at your mess. Look at yourself. Many times we're a mess, aren't we? And we bring our mess to church. Sometimes it makes the church messy, but we're nonetheless a family. And so don't let your mess keep you away. And don't let other people's mess keep you away, because we're here together. Sometimes armies get bloody, don't they? There's a battle out there. And sometimes armies get bloody. But nonetheless, they don't cease to be an army. They rise up on the occasion and they overcome the oppressor. Sailors, if you've ever been a sailor, what do you get? Every sailor gets this. Every sailor gets wet. Okay? You just get wet. Okay? And it's discomforting. And it's uncomfortable. And it's just terrible. But nonetheless, they persevere through it. Now, I'm going to say this in conclusion. Serving Jesus is like changing a dirty diaper. Have you ever thought of it that way? Probably not. You haven't. Okay? It's a messy job, right? Serving Jesus is sometimes a messy job. Sometimes you have to get involved. Okay? And you say, oh, who am I to get involved? Who am I to say? Who am I? Okay? Sometimes it's a messy job. And number two, it has to be done, doesn't it? Has to be done. Okay? And number three, it's a blessing when it's done. Okay? So serving Jesus is like changing a dirty diaper. Okay? Sometimes it's ugly. It's got to be done. But it's a blessing when it is done. So be involved. I want to say thank you to this church for being involved. You guys are awesome. You're involved. You do stuff. But I want you to look to how you can take your church experience outside and become involved there, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, in your family, wherever you find yourself this next week. Find a place where you can build a relationship where you can share your faith with somebody who desperately needs it.